Hi, so now that spring is approaching, a lot of channels are coming out with their gardening videos, their seed starting videos. And there was one recently that I saw, which was about topping young fruit trees. So I thought I would make a response video to that. I don't want to call out the channel, just that the dude is big enough that I thought I should put in some kind of counter content. And it's not that I'm particularly right and he's wrong. It's just a matter of, I'm going to show you my experience with topping young fruit trees, and then you can make your own decision. If you want to shape your tree, you might as well do it from day one. So that's the first argument. And the second one being, when you prune it, you invigorate the tree. We're going to be looking at some cherries and some Asian pears so you can see topping versus no topping. This is a 4-year-old tree. I'm actually, to get this in the frame, I'm actually kind of doing this with my legs. What do you call that? Straddling? So I'm kind of straddling a little bit so that to even get the tree in the frame. But I am 5'4", and the reason why I topped it is because it had a nasty looking canker, which it got pretty soon after I planted it. Even though it's disease resistant sweet cherry, it's called a lapins. And it looked exactly like this at the beginning of last year. And that's because it only had a growth that was similar to this, and it only had a few leaves the whole year. And here's the deal. When you plant a tree, the most important thing to do is to make sure it establishes its roots. The way it gets its energy is through photosynthesis. And if it's going to photosynthesize, then it needs leaves. When you cut off all the surface area, it can't grow a lot of leaves to do a lot of photosynthesis, to generate enough energy to grow those roots. That's why it's a tiny tree. It hasn't been able to get enough sunlight to grow roots, and so the trunk, you can see the trunk is very slim. And I can go to the store right now and get a brand new tree that's like twice as big as this. So I'm gonna register that as Exhibit A in my evidence. So here is another 4-year-old sweet cherry, but this one's a Rainier, and I didn't top it. This is what a 4-year-old tree is supposed to look like. And this is me next to it. So that is Exhibit B. So now we're going to do the same thing with a couple of Asian pears. There was a nasty kind of fire blight that came in the year that I planted them. And I think all of them on this end had gotten it. And whatever it was, it blackened the center growth. So probably the most important part of the tree was the one that died back. Eventually I cut that growth off on at least a couple of these, so a couple of the trees. And I don't even know if it was necessary, because I think the black had penetrated throughout the trunk of all the trees. This is what a couple of them look like. It's the bottom. You see how it's thin, like that cherry. This is where I cut it. And it has this like funky side growth, and it has never really shot up like a central leader unless like it thinks this is it. So it's really lopsided. So I am still taller than this tree. Okay. And this is the second one, which you can see it's a little thicker. I also had topped it right there, that center growth, but it had more stems here. And what do you know, more stems, more branching, and it got bigger. So it's doing a little better, but it's still pretty small. It's taller than me, at least, but just barely. So enter that into exhibits C and D. And this is what a 4-year-old Asian pear is supposed to look like. And it's almost ridiculous for me to stand next to it because you just see how monstrous it is. So now I thought we would have a discussion on when to prune. So this isn't going to be a pruning video, but I thought I would throw in a little bit of pruning stuff, lessons that I've learned. With my experience with figs, this thing's a rock star. This thing can be abused. You can take a saw to it and like cut it to the ground. I tend to prune him in the fall because that's when he has generally put on a lot of growth. When you have too much growth, you just have too much unripened fruit. So sometimes I have to just prune it just so I can walk through here. But it doesn't get any diseases, at least nothing that affects anything. With the main bullet point being, with the fig, do it whenever, wherever, and however is convenient for you. Something like an apple, I would, like, now is a good time, but I think any time in the winter, because our winters don't get that severe. But generally you will hear to prune them late in the winter after severe cold weather, so you don't have wounds on the tree during really cold weather. Now here is an apple that I just planted, and I'm going to use this to show you why, maybe the only reason to prune something early, and that is if you have a competing central leader. So these two guys want to be the central leader, and I only want one of them, so I have to make a decision which one of these to cut. You can also prune wherever you see this, which is a mechanical injury. Although it's possible that that guy would heal if you just taped it. Since he's growing into the pathway, that could be another reason. But even then, that doesn't require first-year pruning. The first-year pruning is just competing central leader, I think, and mechanical injury. Other than that, you would leave all the surface area for it to grow leaves for you and put all the energy into the roots. It's gonna be different for everybody, right? But in Western Washington, where we have wet winters, we cannot prune the Asian pears or the stone fruits until we enter the dry season. When is that going to be this year? I don't know. I know a few years ago when I did some big experimenting with dry farming, that was the year it decided to not rain like in most of May, like virtually all of May. So I could have pruned that year. I could have pruned at the end of April, but I don't know how I would know that was coming exactly. So, but let's just say anywhere from late April to May or June, whenever the dry season starts, that's when you want to prune your Asian pears and your stone fruits. So plums, peaches, almonds, cherries. Some people say the 2nd to 4th year you should prune. What are the downsides to pruning kind of later, around year 4? Is, I don't know, you have bigger wounds when you're cutting a limb off. That's the only thing I can think of. And you seeing the growth of the trees that I topped and didn't top, I would say that's an argument, a strong argument towards don't prune until year 4, maybe 3. And that's kind of one of the reasons why my trees are really ugly right now, is because they're just entering the time when I should be pruning them for the first time. Another place you're supposed to prune is any branch that's close to the ground, say like a foot or 2 feet from the ground. So I have these now thickened branches because I've left them on the tree for a few years that should get pruned off. But I would like your opinion, if you have any, on whether or why I should take them off. I know the two major reasons why you're supposed to take them off is if you mow around your tree, then your mower can run into the branches and cause damage, and so you're just doing it to avoid that kind of damage. But maybe the main thing is that anything on the bottom of the tree isn't going to get enough light to fruit, and so you remove anything that's going to be beneath the canopy. However, I'm not quite convinced about that, just because maybe I have a hard time envisioning how big that canopy is going to be, or because I think there's a way that this lower growth can grow away from the canopy or still somehow get us some sunlight, especially if you're supposed to prune at the top as well. It is possible that it should get pruned just for other reasons, just because it's trying to compete for like dominance, it looks like, because the branch is too thick in diameter. So another reason why some people prune branches is because the branch is either too thin or too thick. So this looks like diameter wise it could be too thick compared to the trunk. Also, branches going straight up are not good, or they're not going to fruit. Here is an example of a tree with really nice angles here. I can stick my fingers in them. I can see maybe somebody wanting to cut off this or this one because now it's too busy. Also taking off this little guy, and when they're this small, you can just like break it off like that, or like that. See this one, this branch that's going inward, so that wouldn't be something that you'd want to take off because you don't want something growing inside the tree. This branch, you see how it's coming out but then it's trying to go up? That would be something, well, when it was younger it would have been better to put a weight on it and train it to go out more versus up. If you want a tree to fruit really fast, then I would recommend a medlar. So this is a perfect example of why you don't want a narrow crotch. So this one was more my fault because I saw the heavy fruit load, but this one branch had a bunch of Asian pears on it. It definitely looked like it was putting too much pressure on this, or too much weight on it, and because of this angle it just snapped off. See, this angle is much worse. But you know, if I was that one dude who was just cutting off anything with poor design, then this would be, I would be cutting off this one and this one, and it would just be one straight line. But by leaving this on, even though it has this bad angle, it's going to have double the amount of leaves than it would otherwise have, so it can form more roots. So because of the lack of growth, partially because this thing bent off, I want to keep this one just so it can convert the sunlight into energy and grow bigger for me. And then I'll be cutting this off later. But it's too early to cut this off now, in my opinion. For this topic, I'm going to start off showing some 4-year-old trees, and we're going to be looking at some cherries. I got to talk fast between the roosters. Oh God. So, it warranted, I don't know, more content on the subject, and some counter, or at least other So I've been talking too much, and so now the roosters are responding to me.